Dead Island 2 and Dying Light 2 are both long-awaited sequels to successful co-op zombie RPGs. Both were released in the last year, with Dead Island 2 just coming out. Because of this connection between Techland and Dead Island, and the similarities between their own zombie game, Dying Light, I thought it'd be good to put these two games in the boxing ring today and see which sequel comes out on top. So what we're going to do today is compare 5 critical elements of these games. For each category, I'll pick one winner, and then we'll see who wins overall at the end. So let me know your winner down below and what you think of this format, as we might do more of these as new games come out that we can compare. First, let's start with performance and graphics, and we'll talk about Dead Island 2 first. Dead Island 2 is a smaller game holistically, and because of those smaller environments and areas, I think it leans better into its performance. So Dead Island 2 for me, playing on PC, both on my laptop and my PC itself, has been a constant 60 frames at high settings for basically my entire playthrough. There are some instances where I might drop frames in those really heavy elemental phases when you've got fire and electricity and all this stuff happening on screen, but basically it's been a consistent 60 frames throughout my entire playthrough. Plus it looks really nice as well. There's also, from like the technical side of things in terms of bugs, I haven't had any real bugs except a couple of weird audio things where the audio tracks just like weren't mixed very well, or sounded like there was a little bit of echo or something like that, but super minor, and I never really experienced anything other than one quest bug where I had to log out and log back in my entire playthrough, and I've completed the game now and spent a little bit of time doing any of the side content as well. Graphically, I think the game looks exceptional, from the shadows in terms of the environments, as well as in some of the darker settings where you've got, these neon lights like in the pier. I think there's a beautifulness to the game and the vistas the game displays, and I think that is because it's not open world, because a lot of these areas you can't actually explore, so it's really just like rendering a still image, but it looks really good. And in the areas that you can actually explore, it's exactly the same. The texture quality here is really high, same as the shadows, and as well as the performance. I think the game looks really good. It's got a nice use of color throughout, and I've thoroughly enjoyed just exploring the game. Dying Light 2, however, has a much different color palette, less oversaturated colors while still having a good breadth of color, especially green to show the overgrowth that's happened throughout the city in Dying Light 2. It's hard to think back to what the performance in Dying Light 2 was like at launch, so let's throw it back to NorZZa a year ago in the review. I played Dying Light 2 on PC, and I played on the ray tracing preset, and for the most of my playthrough I was able to get a steady 60 frames per second with some dips here and there until I got to the central loop, which is the big city section of the game. When I got here, my frames absolutely tanked to below 20, and I had to turn the ray tracing off, and this was without the day one patch or the NVIDIA driver, so your mileage may vary, but graphically as a whole the game is beautiful. The open world is pretty and enjoyable to look at. There's plenty of depth in what you're looking at with the different structures and the city around you and people and infected everywhere. The lighting is like a huge standout as it breaches through the open windows and doors. It's all very high quality, and I could definitely see this game looking beautiful when they fix the ray tracing performance issues. Jumping into the game today, it has clearly improved significantly in terms of its overall performance, but I can't really give Dying Light 2 any points for that because Dead Island 2 just came out and it already performs really well, and Dying Light 2 at launch did not, and they've had an entire year to fix their game. The other downside here is that Dying Light 2 at launch had a multitude of bugs. We had plenty of audio issues. I had this really annoying bug where the intense combat music just like wouldn't stop playing, and I had to close and reopen the game every time it happened. Also couldn't even finish the game. So in Dying Light 2, there's like this big end cutscene that's, gives you information about all the choices and stuff you made, and I couldn't even play it. Like, my game would crash every single time I got to that point, and that was really infuriating. Now, obviously, all these issues have been resolved in 2023, but it doesn't get any points for it, for the same reason it doesn't get any points for improving its performance. So ultimately, in performance and graphics and technical design, this goes to Dead Island 2. It performs extremely well at launch. I've had like one actual game-breaking bug, which was super easy to fix just by closing and reopening the game. It performs well, it looks great, and technically it is absolutely a sound experience compared to what Dying Light 2 was at launch. So this category goes to Dead Island 2. And next we have story. We'll start with Dead Island 2 again. So the story in Dead Island 2 is you play as one of 6 slayers that you can choose from, and you are jumping on a plane gets knocked down, you immediately get bitten because you essentially get bitten in like every single zombie game, and then you use some weird hybrid zombie powers. It's exactly the same thing that happens in Dying Light 2, funnily enough. But anyway, you get bitten, and then you're actually immune, and you go gallivant around the Hella or LA, Los Angeles area and complete just, you know, general activities like looking for people, finding other people, and killing zombies is basically what you do throughout the entire story, other than trying to get out of LA, which is the main crux of the story that you have to essentially do, is try and escape LA. So the story premise here, as you can probably tell by the way I talk about it, isn't much, right? It's just like you get bit, you're immune, it gives you cool zombie powers, you kill zombies, and everyone else around you just kind of like hides in their houses and asks you to do everything for them, which I think is actually okay. Like, it sounds pretty meh, but it's not really what the game's trying to do, right? The main focus for Dead Island 2 is how enjoyable the combat is, and just trying to funnel you into combat, as well as funnel you into these different open worldy, semi-open worldy areas that they've designed. That's the main purpose of the story, is just push you around, go fight zombies, push you into this new area, etc, etc. And it absolutely succeeds in that aspect, if that's what it's trying to do. It's not trying to tell you this heavy, emotional, you know, jam-packed story with twists and turns and all this sort of nonsense. It's just really pushing you to explore these areas, and I think it succeeds at that. But when you compare that to Dying Light 2, however, Dying Light 2 tries to tell a legitimate story with choices and consequence, decisions to make, like actual decisions, as well as dialogue options and ways that you can interact with different characters and choices. You know, if you want to side with this faction, then X will happen. If you side with this faction, then Y will happen. I really like that stuff in Dying Light 2. Now, as mentioned, I couldn't finish the story at launch because of those issues that we had with the game, but the story in Dying Light 2, I actually did enjoy. Despite some lackluster writing that didn't really hit the way that I would have liked it to, I enjoyed my journey of Aiden as playing as the main character here. Now, Aiden is a legitimate character. Unlike in Dead Island 2, the 6 Slayers are really just a vessel to provide quips throughout your journey, and it just depends on what kind of quippy character you want, whereas Aiden is actually a legitimate character that has wants and needs and interacts with the main story, whereas in Dead Island 2 that just doesn't really happen. It's for that reason that Dying Light 2 wins this category here. Combat for Dying Light. We're going to start with Dying Light for this category. So combat in Dying Light 2 is a standard kind of melee action where you've got a weapon and you swing it around. There isn't ranged combat in Dying Light 2. Now, something that Dying Light 2 does have a really good rhythm with is its like blocking and parrying system to parry enemies, and then you can use your parkour skills to jump over them and do those kind of flow-based combat. It's very different to Dead Island 2, but you've got that sort of parkour abilities and combat abilities that you can flow together to interact with the zombies and humans that you're going to be fighting. You do have a bow as your only ranged option, which you probably won't use heaps of unless you're going a specific ranger sort of a build, but the combat here is weighty, it feels good to use. I like the flow of using the parkour abilities and the minor environmental effects that you can do, and there is nothing better than drop kicking enemies in Dying Light 2 and drop kicking them off skyscrapers and all that stuff. Absolutely love it. Dead Island 2 is very similar. It's a melee focused game, but you do have guns and those range sort of options, and everything flows together very similarly, except the use of environment in Dead Island 2 is significantly larger. It's the ways that you can interact with the environment with fire on the ground or electricity or the caustic, the acid effects, and also just the ways that you can interact with the enemies is a little bit different because of that flesh system that they call it, that gore system. We have to avoid showing too much of that actual gore system. If you have played the game, you know what I'm talking about here, but YouTube will demonetize us if we show too much of the gore that's actually in Dead Island 2, because there is a lot of it, and it's kind of the main focus of that combat system. And I honestly think it might be a little too much in some regards. Like, it's a little too gory, but I see what they're going for, and I see that it works, especially in some of those encounters. It feels super satisfying to like maim enemies and like get those like combat bonuses and stuff happening. But personally, I think it's just like a smidge too much of like that realism. Like, it's super realistic, but you know, kudos to them for being able to pull this off. So which combat system wins here? Now, also there is a dropkick in both Dead Island 2 and Dying Light 2. Dying Light 2's dropkick is significantly better, and it's for that reason, and the combat flow of the parkour ability, that Dying Light 2 is our combat winner. I personally prefer that flow in Dying Light 2 compared to the over-the-top gore that is in Dead Island 2. But this category is super close. Like, I think that there is something really amazing about both these games' combat systems that is entirely unique and separate from each other. Fun fact, Dying Light 2 actually just launched like a gore update to their combat system to make it more gory, like 2 days before Dead Island 2 came out. Very interesting, the timing in that. Anyway, let's move on to the world design. For Dead Island 2 here, this isn't an open world game. This is like a semi-open region game where you explore these different areas in Los Angeles and unique locations. These areas are pretty self-contained, but they're super deep in how complex they are and the verticalities of being able to climb and do different things, as well as all these locked doors and hidden things to find and explore. And I haven't felt these areas to be too small during my playthrough because the game isn't overstaying its welcome in trying to force you into the game for, 50, 60 extra amount of hours. But in terms of the overall world space, all the areas are very varied and enjoyable to explore. Conversely, for Dying Light 2, this is a real open world game with two different open world maps to explore that you can literally go anywhere and do all sorts of quests and nonsense and anything that you want to do, like the combat challenges and everything. So this is a hard one to compare because you're comparing a open region-y sort of thing to a proper open world game. The issue here, and comparing these directly, is that Dying Light 2 for me struggles from having too much open world space. It is too large. Now, there are ways to get around, like the glider and obviously the parkour here and being able to lean into that more, but I think the world here is actually too large. I'm remembering back to my original playthrough, there were multiple times where I was like, man, I just want to get to the location I've got to go to, and it's on the other side of the world. And sometimes that's fun in open world games, and it definitely was throughout some of my playthrough for Dying Light 2, absolutely. But after a while, when you're 50 hours into an experience and it's you've got to run another 2 kilometers and you're I just want to get there and continue this storyline that I've been really pushing to trying to do, and sometimes that's a little too much. Dead Island 2, however, didn't struggle from that. The areas are super well contained and you're barely going anywhere. It's go to this next quest, and it's next door, right? It's super small areas that don't feel too small because they have a lot of variation in terms of their looks and overall structures, because they're focused on just the really unique areas of LA. You've got the Pier, Beverly Hills, Hollywood Boulevard, all that sort of stuff. And I think Dead Island 2 takes this cake in this category because despite me loving open world games, Dead Island 2 knows exactly what sort of a game it is. It focuses on that being the combat, and it doesn't overstay its welcome by having a just massive, stupidly large open world game, which they absolutely could have done and wasted everyone's time, but they decided not to go that route, and I really appreciate what they've done there. Let's take a quick pick stop here because we're through 4 categories, and if you're keeping score, we've got Dead Island on 2 points, and we've got Dying Light also on 2 points. Now, our last category is progression, and for me, this is a big category to call out for RPG and role-playing specific games, is how quality their progression and gameplay loop is, and that is what we're going to talk about here. Let's start with Dead Island 2. So Dead Island 2 got rid of the skill tree system from the original in favor of this skill card system where you find skill cards in the world, completing missions, etc., and you can apply those skill cards at literally any time, even in the middle of combat, to your skill system, and they affect the way that your abilities work, or even change your abilities, whether you're doing a ground pound or a war cry or a dash strike, etc., etc. You've got all those abilities, but you've got to pick one and use them specifically. Conversely, Dying Light 2 is a little bit more of a traditional RPG progression, except it has 2 skill trees split into 2 different categories, one being combat, and you gain combat experience to then get combat points to spend on combat skills, and then exactly the same for parkour experience and parkour skills, and you level up those 2 trees differently and picking the different skills in those 2 specific trees. Progression isn't just about skills though, it's also about your armor and your weapons and all that good stuff. In Dead Island 2, there is no armor really at all. You've only got your weapon progression, and the weapons will increase in rarity as your typical rarity systems, as well as the modifications that you can put on those weapons. And this is really important for this melee focused Zombie Slayer, exactly the same as Dying Light 2, which does have melee weapon system that you can mod those weapons, but the modding system in Dead Island 2 is significantly better advanced. It's got much more complexities because it's not trying to be super hyper realistic. You can do weird stuff like all of the different elemental effects that you can put on and the different ways that they can interact with the zombie perks and mods and stuff. So there's more complexity there and the depth of weapons. However, in Dying Light 2, having an armor system as well as weapons and having the variation into 2-handed to 1-handed and the different buffs and skills and stats and stuff that are really in that nitty gritty. I love that stuff, getting deep into the skills and stuff. But in Dead Island 2, it doesn't really have that. It's just these skills. It's much more of a casual RPG progression system compared to Dying Light 2, even though Dying Light 2 is a more static skill tree that you would sort of expect. This is another very close category, and I think both Dead Island 2 and Dying Light 2 have something going for them. In Dying Light 2, it's definitely the different builds with the different types of weapons and armor and stuff that you're using for the set bonuses. In Dead Island 2, it's that weapon complexity and the different mods and perks that you can put onto it. Skill system, however, I definitely prefer Dying Light 2, and because of the way that interacts with the build system and the overall combat flow of upgrading yourself and feeling like you're gaining new abilities throughout your journey, it's going to go to Dying Light 2. So to break all this down, the technical design goes to Dead Island 2 for its fantastic performance at launch and low amount of bugs. The story goes to Dying Light 2 for Aiden's journey that you do take. Combat goes to Dying Light 2 as well for the perfect flow with the parkour and combat abilities. World design goes to Dead Island 2 for its great take on Los Angeles and its willingness not to overcommit to too much in its world design. And progression also goes to Dying Light 2 for its great skill system and build variety with the different armors and set bonuses. So ultimately here, Dying Light 2 takes the cake, but Dead Island 2 was a fantastic game, and I was pleasantly surprised by Dead Island 2. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, which one you're picking, as well as this sort of video format. Let me know what you think about this. We might do more of these. Thanks for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.